Americans are suffering from so-called tipflation.
They're feeling this change, and Americans are very divided over it.
Many say they are feeling the pinch from tipping fatigue.
How bad has tipping culture gotten in New York City? Today, we're gonna find out. Now, to show you how crazy it's gotten, we are gonna buy some self-serve yogurt. The pressure to tip is real. You have the employee standing right in front of you. Even though I did all the work myself, it still encouraged 15, 20% tip. And you feel a little bit cheap sometimes if you don't do it. According to Wikipedia, tipflation and tip creep are terms to describe the US's recent widespread expansion of gratuity to more industries, as opposed to being traditionally only prevalent in full-service restaurants. Tipflation's origins are likely the COVID-19 pandemic and the inflation surge which began in 2021. The social pressure created from such systems is often separately mentioned as guilt tipping, and tipflation has also been seen as causing tipping fatigue, which is the resentment that American consumers generally feel from tipping culture. I polled my international viewers about their opinion of tipping, and their answers, well, they were pretty strong. I find it absolutely insane that stores at Newark Airport have the audacity to ask for tips at checkout when I had to do everything, including scanning the items and checking out myself. If anything, I should tip myself. Been living in Japan for many years now, and among the reasons why I love this country is the fact that you don't need to tip to receive impeccable customer service. No matter what your background is, every customer is generally treated professionally with respect, decency, and hospitality. Personally, I find it rude to be expected to give a tip for service. It should not be my responsibility to pay staff just because their employer doesn't give them a decent wage. If I want to leave a tip, it should be my choice and the amount. A trip to the US gets very expensive if you're tipping every time you buy food or drink, which in turn makes me avoid these outlets. And we actually got a response from a local here, and he said, what happened when in Rome? If visitors came to your country, would you not expect them to follow your cultural norms? Now, I have seen some hostility in comments going back and forth about the US culture behind tipping and supporting service workers and people coming from other countries who are just plain fed up. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, I appreciate it. I bumped into Omari, one of my viewers here, and I want his opinion as a New Yorker about tipping culture. What do you think?
Obviously, you know, a lot of servers and things like that get most of their payments off tips, so I don't mind tipping. The thing that I've been noticing with a lot more restaurants is gratuity being added, which kind of isn't fun, especially if you run into like not the best help, which is like a thing that's tend to be annoying. But obviously with everything going up, I want to pay people more, and good service definitely deserves a great tip.
What do you think about places where they put the terminal in front of you and there's like 15, 20% added just for, I don't know, like getting yogurt?
That's the thing that kind of kills me. Also, like, you know, sometimes like with a 5-minute Uber in the city, because you just want to avoid some traffic, it's like a $20 or $15 tip. That could be more than what you ordered.
Dude, thank you so much. I think it's time we broke down the origins of the tipping culture of the US. The word tip dates to the 17th century when London taverns and coffee houses would put signs saying to ensure promptitude alongside boxes or bowls where customers could leave an extra coin for faster service. Tipping was almost non-existent in the US before the Civil War, but wealthy Americans visiting Europe brought the practice to the US in the mid-1800s, unsurprisingly eager to mimic European customs, but it took root as a business strategy during Reconstruction. And this is so ironic today because many European visitors, European countries are completely opposite of the US tipping system. Some hospitality companies started to use freed slaves after the Civil War, paid them low wages, and encouraged customers to leave tips. Now, this is fascinating because not everybody was for tipping even in the 19th century. According to an article that appeared in the Times in 1897, there was a movement brewing against tipping in America. The anti-tipping group believed that tipping was the vilest of imported vices because it created an aristocratic class in a country that fought hard to eliminate a class-driven society, and there were even 6 state legislators that attempted and failed to pass an anti-tipping bill that would make leaving gratuities unlawful. Even with all that backlash, by 1938, President Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which established the first minimum wage of 25 cents per hour, but there was no minimum for tipped wages. In so doing, Congress codified the tipping practice, and it wouldn't be until 1966 before it would pass a minimum for tipped workers, which is about where we're at today in 2023, and we're gonna get to how New York City handles tipped employees a little later on. I always find coffee shops a little bit controversial on how much you should tip for my non-American viewers. Just want to get a small latte. Now you see, I have no problem with how that machine operated. It just gave you $1, $2, or $3 tip. I always tip $1 if they're making me a latte. I mean, I do think that being a barista is a skill, and I'll tip on it, but not everyone agrees. If you wanted to repeal tipping in the US, I think it would be a lot harder than you think due to social pressure. And there was an interesting study, according to Michael Lynn, professor of consumer behavior at Cornell, with a tip credit, employers can rely on tips to cover a decent portion of their labor costs, which allow them to bring down menu prices. For example, there's 2 establishments equal in quality of food and service. The only difference is one allows tipping and has lower menu prices, and the other has a higher menu price because they don't allow tipping. Consumers are more likely to dine out at the restaurant with a cheaper menu, even if they pay the same amount after leaving a tip. All right, let's talk about minimum wage for tipped employees in New York, like your average waiter. The minimum wage for food service workers in the city is $15 per hour. Their employers can satisfy the minimum wage by combining a cash wage of at least $10 with a tip allowance of no more than $5 per hour. So the normal minimum wage in New York is still $15 an hour, and I'm hoping that waiters and bartenders are making even more with tipping. Auto gratuities and extra credit card fees have been something that have annoyed a lot of New Yorkers, and I want to show you in action. And 1 large potato fries. Now there was a $4 service charge added, which is close to 15%. And they didn't even give you the option of tipping. It was thrown on there. This is interesting because there's no waiters here. It's just order and take it to eat. So you're seeing tipping popping up into spots that I don't think I saw it even a few years ago. Now that you saw New York's secret food tax in action, there's other places where you might run into it. Now, the New York Post had an article from September about wellness fees or kitchen staff appreciation fees. One restaurant was tacking on a 5% wellness charge added to all checks in support of health benefits for our staff, but it is not a fee for service. And it points out how in a high-end restaurant, the social pressure to not look cheap and say you don't want to pay the extra fee, very strong. Something I want my tourists to be very careful of is double tipping. Now, I saw this at a high-end rooftop bar recently where my cocktail was $20. They threw in an extra 20% auto gratuity and tax, so it came out to about $25, and they still gave me the option to tip 15 to 20% on top of that. So sometimes in the city, you have to be like a detective to look at your bill to figure out exactly where all these fees are coming from. What's actually considered proper tipping etiquette in New York? Well, Trip Savvy had a really useful guide. For taxis, 10 to 20% of your fare. Porters at a hotel, $2 per bag delivered to your room. Restaurants, 15 to 20% of total bill, although I personally agree with 20% on the pre-tax total, assuming that you got good service. Where do we go from here? Well, companies do what DoorDash and Uber Eats just did, raising minimum salaries. DoorDash just made the following huge announcement after a court decision didn't go their way about minimum payouts. As of December 4th, Dashers who deliver in New York City will now earn at least $29.93 per hour of active time, nearly twice New York's $15 minimum wage for other workers. This rate excludes tips and is just the minimum, so Dashers still have the opportunity to earn more than the minimum. And this is the absolute bombshell. they're now moving tipping to after checkout in preparation for increased fees, which they're going to need to pay the Dashers more money. The new regulations will force us to raise fees for orders in New York City. In order to better balance the impact of these new costs, we're moving the option to tip in the DoorDash app to after checkout. This change comes as a recommendation by the NYC Department of Consumer and Worker Protection and has been done to help ensure our platform remains affordable for all New Yorkers. So this is basically saying to me, because we're paying our delivery workers a fair wage, tipping is optional. We're not going to put it in your face. If you want to add a tip after you get your Dasher, totally up to you. So I think their tips are going to go down. Will you still tip your DoorDash driver knowing they make about $30 an hour? You tell me. I found one super popular group on Reddit with 11,000 members called End Tipping that advocates for a system where US workers aren't reliant on tips. Some have even gone to such extremes as not tipping anymore, period. And I'm curious, if you're visiting New York or you live here, what's your stance on tipping? Has it gotten out of control? Now that you know about tipping in New York, you may be curious about what it's like to actually live here. And in this video, I share 10 things I wish I knew before moving to NYC. Watch this video next.